What this goes to show, ladies and gentlemen, is that nonsense remains nonsense even when it's talked by world-famous scientists. Stephen Hawking was interviewed by The Guardian, and he said, heaven is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark. I was asked to comment. I did. Atheism is a fairy story for people afraid of the light. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Physicist Stephen Hawking. Around the world, the headlines were full of it. Stephen Hawking says physics leaves no room for God, and so on with many variations. And these headlines were referring to the publication of his book co-authored with Leonard Mlodinow entitled The Grand Design. That book went straight to the top of the bestseller charts. And I want to go straight to the heart of the book, The Grand Design, with this central claim: because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Now, perhaps the first question to ask is, what does Hawking mean when he uses the word nothing? The universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Because notice the assumption in the first part of that statement. Because there is a law of gravity. That is an assertion of existence. Because there is something, the universe will create itself out of nothing. It's a very odd way to start, isn't it? Hawking assumes that there is a law of gravity. But the main issue surely is this: gravity, or a law of gravity, is not nothing. If Hawking is using that word in its usual philosophically correct sense of non-being. If he's not, he should have told us. So the heart of this book appears to be an assertion that the universe is simultaneously created from nothing and from something, which I do not regard as a very promising start. Now, of course, I am aware that when physicists talk about nothing, they often appear to mean a quantum vacuum, which is manifestly not nothing. And Hawking alludes to it later in the book. We are a product, he says, of quantum fluctuations in the very early universe. I'm tempted to suspect that a lot of this is a bit too much ado about nothing. Now, I know it's late in the morning for logic, ladies and gentlemen, but I just pointed out to you what I think is the first level of self-contradiction in Hawking's statement. But I believe there to be three. Let's analyze it a bit further. The universe can and will create itself. Now, if I say X creates Y, I'm presupposing the existence of X in order to bring Y into existence. That is what the word means. So if I say X creates X, I am presupposing the existence of X to account for the existence of X. Well, this is obviously self-contradictory, and it's logically incoherent even if we put X equal to the universe. To presuppose the existence of the universe to account for the existence of the universe sounds like something out of Alice in Wonderland, not science. Now that's a second distinct level of contradiction. The first one you will recall is the universe is created out of something which is nothing. The second is it creates itself. But then the notion that the law of gravity, that a law of nature explains the existence of the universe, is also self-contradictory. Since a law of nature by definition surely depends for its own existence on the prior existence of the nature it purports to describe, and I shall come back to that later. What this goes to show, ladies and gentlemen, is that nonsense remains nonsense even when it's talked by world-famous scientists. But what it serves to obscure, what serves to obscure the illogicality is the fact that the statements are made by scientists. Because it seems to me in the whole contemporary debate, one of the dangers, a real danger, is that we confuse a statement by a scientist with a statement of science. Not all statements by scientists are statements of science, and therefore they do not enjoy whatever authority you ascribe to science itself. Now, the worrying thing about all of this to me is that this illogical notion of the universe creating itself out of a nothing, which is a something, by a law of gravity which appears to exist without gravity itself possibly, is not a peripheral point in the book The Grand Design. It's the key argument. And if the key argument is invalid, in one sense there's little left to say. But if scientists didn't put the universe there, neither did their theories, nor the laws. And yet Hawking seems to suggest they did. Is the unified theory so compelling, he wrote in A Brief History of Time, that it brings about its own existence? There's the self-contradictory self-reference again. Now, much as I find it hard to believe, Hawking claims that all is necessary to create the universe is the law of gravity. And when he was asked on Larry King Live, which I believe is an American TV program, where gravity came from, he answered, M theory. So gravity comes from theory. That's where it comes from. Well, to say that a theory or a physical law could bring anything into existence is surely to misunderstand what theory is. Scientists construct theories involving mathematical laws to describe natural phenomena. But on their own, those theories and laws cannot cause anything, let alone create it. It's delightfully ironic, isn't it, that it was none other than William Paley who pointed this out a long time ago. He's speaking of the person who just stumbled on a watch on the heath, the famous story. He says that such a person would not be less surprised to be informed that the watch in his hand was nothing more than the result of the laws of metallic nature. It is a perversion of language to assign any law as the efficient operative cause of anything. A law presupposes an agent, for it is only the mode according to which an agent proceeds. It implies a power, for it is the order according to which that power acts. Without this agent, without this power, which are both distinct from itself, the law does nothing, is nothing. And surely that is obvious from Hawking's own examples. The very first example he gives us of physical law is this. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. That is a law. It is an observed regularity in that sense. It is descriptive and predictive. But the law that the sun rises in the east or sets in the west doesn't move the sun, and it certainly didn't create the sun, did it? So the very example the man gives, Newton's law of motion, have never in the whole of the history of the universe caused a snooker ball to move over a table. It's a person with a cue that does that. The laws will describe, at least for the first couple of bounces before chaotic effects set in, what's going to happen. But laws don't cause anything nor create anything. So what can Hawking possibly mean by saying the universe arises naturally from physical law? Now, his book is called The Grand Design. And what I found so interesting in it is that he finds the impression of design, to quote someone else, is so powerful that he spends a couple of chapters on it and then decides to explain it away. Our universe and its laws, he writes, appear to have a design that it both is tailor-made to support us and, if we are to exist, leaves little room for alteration. That is not easily explained and raises the natural question of why it is that way. The discovery relatively recently of the extreme fine-tuning of so many of the laws of nature could lead at least some of us back to the old idea that this grand design is the work of some grand designer. That is not the answer of modern science. Our universe seems to be one of many, each with different laws. Now, the interesting thing is that Hawking spends a lot of time giving evidence of the grand design, and he calls it an old idea. And of course, this is a very simple philosophical trick. Because it's old, of course, it's irrelevant and false. But that's nonsense. He doesn't even consider its truth. He simply calls it old. And he says it's the answer of modern science. Now that is going miles too far. What he might say, that is not the answer of some modern scientists. Because so far as I can see, science has not got a unified view on the matter. Now, Bill Craig has done me a great favor in going into the multiverse thing in detail. And one of the very interesting things is that Hawking advances the multiverse and M-theory and all of the rest of it as an alternative to God. And he falls into the very same mistake he did at a lower level earlier. God or the multiverse. But if there is more than one universe, how is that an argument against the existence of God? God could create a multiverse, couldn't he? Now, in the times when Hawking's book appeared, there was a letter from a very distinguished student of his called Don Page, who is a professor of theoretical physics, has written a number of papers with Stephen Hawking and now teaches at the University of Alberta. And I wrote to him because he distanced himself from Hawking's conclusions. And Don Page is actually a Christian, and he wrote this to me, and he has given me permission to quote it to you. I certainly would agree that even if M-theory were a fully formulated theory, which it isn't yet, and were correct, which of course we don't know, that would not imply that God did not create the universe. So arguments about the status of M-theory are in a sense irrelevant to us this morning. The only thing I would point out is that Roger Penrose, an equally distinguished mathematician working in Oxford, said that M-theory is very far from any testability. It's a collection of ideas, hopes, aspiration, and referring directly to the Hawking-Mlodinow book, he says, the book is a bit misleading. It gives you this impression of a theory that's going to explain everything. It's nothing of the sort. It is not even a theory. Indeed, in Roger Penrose's estimation, M-theory was hardly science. And perhaps you should note that Penrose is a member of the British Humanist Association. There's a wonderful review of Hawking's book given by Tim Radford. It goes like this. In this very brief history of modern cosmological physics, the laws of quantum and relativistic physics represent things to be wondered at but widely accepted, just like biblical miracles. M-theory invokes something different, a prime mover, a begetter, a creative force that is everywhere and nowhere. This force cannot be identified by instruments or examined by comprehensible mathematical prediction, and yet it contains all possibilities. It incorporates omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence, and it's a big mystery. Remind you of anybody? Stephen Hawking was interviewed by The Guardian. And he said, heaven is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark. I was asked to comment. I did. Atheism is a fairy story for people afraid of the light. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.